Hello.
Hi.
We're just letting everybody come in to our event here. So I'll just give it about a minute or two to let everyone get settled. Make sure you have a cup with a warm beverage. Well, it's after 6 here, so you guys can have any beverage you would like.
I have my shamrocks on for tomorrow.
Oh, nice.
That's a good reminder, actually.
So we're here for our very first cup of tea. And we have about 22 participants in already. And we have a bit of a tight on time because there's a meeting following this event. So I would like to get started and hopefully people will catch up. So this is our very first cup of tea. My name is Ivana Rostevsky, and most of you have seen me at some other meetings, but I'm a parent in research at Sick Kids, and I work in Dr. Helen Damaris's lab, and I help manage some of the projects. I don't have any science background. I have life background and experience in retinoblastoma, so I bring that into the lab and into the projects. But today is about sharing information and about the community getting to know each other in a relaxed environment. We're here to have a chat, and this is kind of like having a nice coffee date with friends. So that's the atmosphere I'd like to set up for it. So our agenda for today, I'll give you some information about the event, but what is a cup of tea that we're planning here, a little bit of housekeeping, and then we're going to have our guest speakers. We have Barbara Mohan sharing her retinoblastoma journey, and Dr. Catherine Payton sharing some of the scientific summaries of the article we're going to be discussing, and then we'll have a conversation with the group. So this meeting is taking place at the beginning part of a tumor board meeting, so we have to stay on time. We have 45 minutes, and if things are starting to run a little bit over time, I might have to just sort of jump in. So the cup of tea, this might be more familiar using the term journal club. It's an event intended to bring the Canadian retinoblastoma community together for an informal discussion about a research article. This will be occurring quarterly throughout 2021, and our next event is planned for June, so keep an eye out for that. Discussions will center around articles which our CRAB members have created plain language summaries for. So a plain language summary, we have developed a process of how we're creating them, and it starts with a patient, the term being used in a broad sense of survivor or a family member. So a patient selects an article and is given guidance on how to read scientific articles and how to write a plain language summary. With that, they're also partnered with a clinician or researcher who may or may not have been an author of the article. And then the patient writes a plain language summary with the help of the clinician or researcher. The reason the patient writes it is because the voice of the patient really comes out, and it's intended to be easy to read and understand. So when they phrase it in their own terms, that way, most likely all of us will understand it as well. So a plain language summary then is posted to our website, and the authors are invited to share their summary at a cup of tea event. So for today's cup of tea, we'll be discussing the article Screening for Pineal Trilateral Retinoblastoma Revisited, a meta-analysis. The plain language summary is available on our website. Our website is rbcanadaresearch.com. And then if you go on the top ribbon here, one of the options is article summaries. And if you scroll down, there's the article will be there. The summary will be there. So the importance of this meeting what we're doing is information sharing, and the effect of information sharing on the personal side, what we're doing here is just building community through sharing our experiences. Barbara will be sharing her experience, but we can also discuss our experiences during our conversation. We're breaking barriers to communication, and we're building trust. For the scientific effect, we're engaging in discussion on the research findings on a level playing field. We're identifying gaps in research and figuring out what still needs to be answered. And the outcome that we're going to have is a better understanding of scientific articles. And one of the benefits of that is definitely being able to form an educated opinion and being an active participant in decision making. But being able to also sort through data and jargon and critically think about the article and what constitutes scientific authority. So just a bit of housekeeping. If you change your Zoom view layout to speaker view, you'll have an easier way to view our guest speakers. That's if you click on the view button and select the gallery option. Please save any questions and comments for our conversation section, which will come at the end. And at the end, or at that time when we're doing our conversation, you can use the raise hand function, and I will call on participants to share their stories and ask questions. And how you would do that is on your bar, on your Zoom bar, if it's an older version, you might have to click on participants and a window will pop up where you'll be able to select the raise hand function, or there might be a reaction button on your Zoom toolbar. You could click that to get to raise hand, or you just might have raise hand on the Zoom toolbar. So I would like to introduce you to Barbara Mohan, who's the wife of a bilateral retinoblastoma survivor, Stephen, and a mother of Jasper, who was successfully treated in infancy, but relapsed with a pineal tumor 11 years later and passed away at the age of 15. Barbara is a retinoblastoma champion. She's an active participant in the Canadian Retinoblastoma Research Advisory Board. She's also a member of the Family Advisory Committee at Canuck Place Children's Hospice. And Dr. Catherine Payton, she's the head of the Division of Ocular Oncology at the Vancouver Hospital, clinical professor of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of British Columbia, and tumor group chair at the BC Cancer Agency. Dr. Payton is a longtime member of the Canadian Retinoblastoma Research Advisory Board and regularly participates in our events and research activities. So Barbara, I will stop sharing and you can share your screen.
Okay, can everybody see the title page?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So thank you for having me at this cup of tea event. I'm going to talk from the perspective of our journey through retinoblastoma and kind of finish with some points on the article, just to kind of put it in context, in a family context. So this is our sort of family timeline, and our retinoblastoma journey started back in 1970 with the birth of my husband, who was diagnosed with retinoblastoma at 18 months and had his left eye enucleated and the other eye successfully treated. So this is him about 2 years old after he has his prosthesis. And his is a sort of a success story. He had successful treatment, and then he went on to a really active childhood and adulthood. He's participated in all sorts of high-speed sports and adventurous activities. And he is going to be 51 on Saturday. So a real reason for us as a family to expect the best outcome for a retinoblastoma survivor. So while he's growing up, I'm growing up. This is a picture of me at my university graduation. So I have an undergraduate degree in biology, a science degree, and this is on my graduation day with my folks, who I think are on the call. And I've presented the slide because I want people to understand that part of the reason I got involved in lay summaries is because I do have some of the vocabulary and background and understanding about research and abstracts and statistical significance that not maybe everybody has. So this is sort of a unique way that I can contribute to the research community as a family member, because I have that background. So So after graduating from university, Stephen and I both ended up on this tall ship sailing halfway around the world and met, fell in love, got married. So this is us on our wedding day. We were both really interested in being parents at the outset, and we knew that Stephen's condition was genetic. So we saw a geneticist back in 1993 and kind of got the statistics on what the chances of a child of ours having retinoblastoma were. And we're still really interested in going ahead and having children because Stephen's outcome was so positive. We just sort of expected the same for any child of ours. But before we could go ahead and get pregnant, I was diagnosed with cancer. And so I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer, had my thyroid gland removed and had successful treatment for that. But part of the treatment involves radioactive iodine. And so they suggest a delay before you have kids. So it was about 5 years later before we got pregnant. And Jasper was born in 1998. So this is Jasper at 4 months old. And you're going to see a lot of portraits of Jasper. Most of them were taken by my mom. And this one was at 4 months, he was, lots of close-up pictures. And this one's interesting to me because it has some artifacts in the pupils that, we were aware and looking for it, and yet we didn't see this. And so Jasper was followed from birth by a retinal specialist in Victoria. And his first examination there didn't pick up anything. And in 1998, this was the start of genetic testing. And their genetic testing had been approved for retinoblastoma families in Ontario, and the cost was covered, and it wasn't in BC yet. And so we were actually, between the 2-month check and the 5-month check, we were in an active letter writing campaign to try and get funding so that he could have a genetic testing so that he wouldn't have to go through EUAs. And at his 5-month appointment, we took that success letter to the retinal specialist and said, look, we can have a genetic test so we don't have to have these exams under anesthesia. And he said, well, it doesn't matter because he's got tumors in both eyes. So we were very quickly referred on to Dr. Payton in Vancouver. Within 24 hours, Jasper was treated with cryo and laser, and he had a scan that showed that there was no pineal involvement at that time. And this is the next day. Friday he's diagnosed, Saturday he's treated, Sunday we were home. And then we went through a few years of treatment with him, including we had to have systemic chemotherapy for him. And so, this is sort of 1999, we're almost done chemo. He had more chemo than usual because he had stubborn tumors. But really, he had one of the best outcomes. Now looking back, I can see he had one of the best outcomes possible. He kept both eyes, full vision in both eyes, a small blind spot in one that he never noticed. And he went on to having a very active, exceptional childhood and healthy childhood and life. So we moved to a small island north of land. And Jasper grew into this extraordinary boy, and I could talk for 15 years about how extraordinary he was. He was super intelligent, very gifted, ahead in school by several grades. He was musical for an intellectually gifted boy. He was incredibly outgoing and engaging and connected with people. He was wise, he was musical. He really was the full package. And that is a comfort to me now that he's gone, that he had this extraordinary boyhood. So, and then in the summer that he turned 13, so this is a picture taken of him on his 13th birthday, and this is a few weeks later, he started to develop headaches. This is after a well child check that he'd had in March of the year. And we just kind of chalked it up to dehydration, because at this point in a retinoblastoma journey, as a parent, you're told to watch for bone pain. So children entering adolescence, maybe secondary cancers coming up in the bones, and he hadn't really hit a growth spurt yet. He was still immature that way. And so he didn't complain of bone pain, he complained of headaches, and headaches were just not on anybody's radar. So this picture of the cowboy hat is him in Calgary visiting his grandparents. My mom actually called me and said, something's not right with him. He had headache and nausea, but no other flu symptoms, and the symptoms passed. But now 10 years later, looking back, I can see it in his eyes that there's a sparkle that's kind of missing. And so hindsight is always kind of 2020 is, I guess, what I'm getting at. And I can see this starting here. And he wasn't formally diagnosed until November of that year, when the headaches became more frequent. And he had a CT scan where we were living in Pell River. And then he was referred immediately down to Children's Hospital, and we left with about 3 hours notice. And stayed for 8 months. So, and he had the full treatment for pinealoblastoma, which involved chemotherapy, which was very successful, and a stem cell transplant and rescue. And then he didn't have a tumor resection at the time or tumor surgery at the time because everybody was really impressed with how quickly the chemotherapy knocked that tumor flat. So he never had a surgery. And then the chemo was so successful that there was nothing but really scar tissue left that could be seen. And then we went home after the stem cell transplant and had approximately 4 months thinking that he was cured. And this is a picture taken in those 4 months. His hair is growing back. He's looking really fully healthy, but the whole time cancer was growing in his brain and spine. And so by December, there were symptoms and his MRI showed metastatic disease. And then he underwent radiation treatment for the prescribed cycles, which is, I think, 33 cycles. And it was not successful. And he passed away in July of 2013, which was just past his 15th birthday. So why did I get involved in the research aspect? And I got involved, 6 years after Jasper passed away. And it's because after that time, when you're in treatment, you're kind of head down, coping, answering the questions that are current for the day. But when you get outside of that, you start to look back, and there's so many questions that I have about his treatment path and our journey. And one of them is my own genetic contribution to his picture because of being a cancer survivor myself. I always had the question about the impact of treatments that he had as an infant on the development of secondary cancers. We actually don't know what happened there in his pineal tumor. We don't know if it was trilateral, if it was an independent secondary malignancy, or whether it was due to his genetic disposition. The pathology was not definitive, so we don't really have an answer to that. Why aren't parents told about the symptoms of trilateral retinoblastoma? We weren't looking for headaches. Diagnostic protocols. So, the article is about scanning and screening, and right now we're dependent on MRIs, and they're in short supply. And the effects of too much scanning sometimes leads to too many false positives. And so, are there other ways that we can diagnose? And one of the hard ones is that when we got to the end of our cancer journey with him, there was nothing experimental for us to try. There were no clinical trials. There were no treatments under development. It was just a dead end for us. And it made me question why. Like, why is there nothing happening to treat this particular kind of cancer? So those were the reasons why I got involved in the lay summaries. So, and really on a personal level, the reasons were more grief related, like why my son, why this outcome? We were so prepared. I was so educated. Stephen knew his history. We were sort of ahead of the curve in terms of our knowledge of what the risks were going into childbearing, and so that doesn't seem fair. And then when I dwell on that, I start to think, okay, well, what if I got all those answers? Like, what would I do with them? Would I blame someone? Would I have regrets? Do I really want to know all that stuff? Would it make me feel any better about what happened? And I think the answers to those are no. So the reasons ultimately that I come to do this kind of contribution is because I hope it will help other people. And if it helps other people, then his death is not meaningless, which is what you fear when you lose a child. Like, what was all that for? Kind of why, right? So, and then I also come to my husband, who is an adult survivor, and research is so important for his ongoing survival. We became aware of the risks to him during our treatment with Jasper, and he's part of a unique group of older retinoblastoma survivors that are entering, a lot of them are entering uncharted territory, and my husband is phenomenally healthy physically, but that can change at any time, and we're a little bit lost as to how to stay on top of that and what is coming ahead. And I lost a child already. I don't want to be an early widow, so it's important for me that I advocate for ongoing research. So, and I mentioned that Stephen's doing quite well. He struggled himself, and I would say that more than any physical risks from retinoblastoma, the biggest risks to his health were mental. He suffered from PTSD and complex grief following Jasper's death, and those things are by far the greatest risk to his life that he's encountered. So he's written a whole book about his journey, and so there's lots of details in there if people want to read about in detail about the retinoblastoma journey. But basically he's thriving, and this is a very short video clip of what he was doing last month. So so he's obviously doing well physically, and we hope that he continues to take care of his health and continues to do so. So the article results are interesting and informative, but this is a meta-analysis, so it's basically consolidating other research, and it says right in the paper that there's not enough prior research, and so as a result, the conclusions of the article wouldn't really point to any basis for changing treatment protocols or changing monitoring protocols at this time. So I've put yet because I'm aware that there's more of this kind of research coming. And so there might be conclusions coming in the future, but right now there's not a ton to go on. So I'm also really aware that statistics and research describe groups of groups, not individuals. And this is a statistical kind of principle. And if I do the math, and I look at what are the chances that any child of ours inherited the gene, and then what are the chances of any child of ours who inherited the gene getting the cancer. And then the article talks about of those with bilateral disease, only 3% will develop trilateral. And of the ones the 3% that develop trilateral, only 5% are going to present with trilateral after they're 3 years old. So if you combine all those statistics, you get Jasper was in the 0.06% of children born to someone with a retinoblastoma gene, which is really the conclusion there is that he was unique. And so I kind of already knew that about my son, that he was unique. And so I don't, there were some reassurances in reading that you can read all the articles you want, but it doesn't describe your individual experience with this disease. It's helpful, but it's never going to be the whole story for a family. So I think I'll stop there and pass it on to Dr. Payton.
Thank you so much, Barbara. That was a really beautiful story that you're sharing. And this is how we can learn from each other, by sharing not just your story, but in your interpretations and your view of the article. So I really appreciate that you're here with us today. And I appreciate that you're a member of CRAB and you participate with us and share your feedback. So thank you. And can you hold up your book? Sorry, I think some people were interested.
Okay, so this is actually my husband's book, just to make it clear. It's a memoir from him. And it talks about him from childhood, like all the way through to his struggles with mental and emotional health after Jasper's death and how he overcame those. And so yeah, it's a triumphant story, but also sad, of course. So, and it's available on Amazon, basically, for anyone who's interested. So.
Thank you. And this is a great now segue into Dr. Payton's presentation, going a bit more into the article itself and giving us some more information.
Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. And Barbara, thanks so much for that. I hope, more of a story to tell, because I think seeing what we're talking about as a story, first of all, helps it to stick, and secondly, makes it less mysterious and maybe more practical and more approachable. So that's what I'm hoping this does. And I'm pretty sure that most of you will recognize the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. So I'm kind of hoping that's what we're having, is the Mad Hatter's Tea Party across the country for retinoblastoma. I may not be quite as scientific as Ivana thinks, so I hope this meets what you wanted, Ivana. I am presenting this to a group of people, so if I were to stand up in a scientific presentation, this would be one of the first slides I would need to show. who I am, and it would say, I have no conflicts to declare. What does that mean? Well, from a scientific point of view, when you stand up to talk about something, it's required in most circumstances that you declare whether you're going to make a profit, whether you've got an investment in something, whether you're related to somebody else who makes their living that way, so that the validity of what you say, the dependability of what you say, the ability of people to believe that is reliable. So sometimes my disclaimer looks like this. This is one I actually used in a presentation. And because it's about retinoblastoma, this is usually what my declaration looks like. It says I have nothing to declare, but I have a vested interest in seeing patients thrive. They sometimes ask us if we are using medications in ways that aren't normally prescribed or approved. And at my university, at least, it asks not only if you have a conflict of interest, which is what I was just talking about, but also asks if you have a conflict of commitment. Are you actually sort of committed in too many places, or places and ways that could be conflicted? Why do I bring that up? Because I want you to think about where information comes from and who's providing it and how well you can believe them. And so we're talking about scientific articles, but it's probably not an awful lot different than other things you read. You may have your favorite newspaper or your favorite news magazine or your favorite music magazine or your favorite fashion magazine where you trust the information because information you've gotten from there before has been information that was valid. It gave you an example, or it gave you a product, or it gave you something else that you tried that worked. They tell you something that you can trust, and so you go back and you will buy that journal or that magazine or that newspaper again. Or you'll watch that television show, or you'll watch Fox News or CNN, but we all intuitively now understand that there are biases to all of that. So that's what I wanted you to at least think about, not just with respect to commercial things like the media, but actually in science. How is it even possible that science isn't just bland and scientific? Well, there's all kinds of reasons for that. People don't set out to knowingly be incomplete, but sometimes the circumstances they're in, sometimes the influences around them, sometimes the things that they don't get a chance to do set them up for that. So I'm going to talk about this article, not even so much in terms of the material, because I think the plain language summary was pretty straightforward, but a little bit in how I look at an article. So this is an example of how I would assess an article, and you don't have to look at everything all at one time, don't worry. But apart from do I believe the journal or the newspaper that it's published in, the things I want to know about an article I read is there a clear question at the beginning? You know, do I know what they're trying to figure out? Are they clear enough in stating their objective right up front? I want to know that for two reasons. I want to know if it's a topic that's interesting to me. And frankly, if it's about a urology cancer, I probably won't read the article. And if I can see that somewhere in the title, that's probably one that's not going to appeal to me. Fortunately, most of those don't end up in the ophthalmology literature. But like people who read newspapers, I'm not always reading Science or Nature or the New England Journal of Medicine, where we have broad topics. So is there a clear question? And in this paper, they actually did ask a clear question. Can I state what they were asking? The answer was yes. They wanted to know until what age pinealoblastoma might occur. They also wanted to know if the age at pinealoblastoma occurrence mirrored the age of retinoblastoma. So if you got your retinoblastoma early, did you get your pinealoblastoma early or not? In the very conclusion, they slipped in another piece of information. that is related to that question, but not quite. But these were the two questions, so I wanted to see if they'd answered those questions. The second big question when you're reviewing any kind of article is, what type of a study is it? And this is probably I don't want to call it the most controversial, that's not what I mean, but it's the most variable piece. And it sets you up for understanding what you can or should expect from the article. Sometimes studies present a single case or a group of cases that highlights a new idea. Somebody had 3 of something and all of a sudden they realized something different that nobody had written about, so they just write a description of all the findings and then maybe some conclusions about it. It might present new technology and how new technology was used to try and find something. It might be a study of, nowadays we see what they call big data studies, where they look at the pharmacare registry for all of Ontario and try and make associations between people taking a drug for X and developing Y. So the different kinds of studies have different questions attached to them, but also different processes. So in this particular case, they told you right up front in the first page of it that it was something called a meta-analysis. And that sort of study takes as many articles as you can find that that purport to answer the question or that are relevant to the question being asked, and tries to pull the data from all of them together to figure out whether in aggregate there was enough description. You heard Barbara say it's a rare occurrence, and so it's not as if one center has hundreds and hundreds of patients, and you kind of have to pull together data from all over the place in order to do that. And in fact, when you look at this particular study, they took a strategy to pull articles between 1995 and 2017, I think. And when they said what they were looking for, they found 185 articles in PubMed and 336 in Embase. They went to scientific databases and they found articles that were appropriate. And then they kept weaning that down until they got to 18 articles. So that's a lot of weeding. That's a lot of having to go through all the details to find out what's there, dividing them up amongst multiple authors perhaps to understand if the article met the criteria for even asking the question. So that told me what kind of work has gone in behind it. Sometimes the study will be what you think of as a bench research study, where they are measuring something in the lab, doing something with the genes, doing something where you make an experiment and you measure and then you publish that. But for a lot of medical questions, that's not actually what happens. And then some of the studies are psychosocial studies. So at any rate, you need to think about what kind of a study is it, and that's usually dependent on what question you're asking. The next thing you need to know is, have they described their methods well? Could you go and bake the same cake by following the recipe? So if I took this paper, could I generate the same articles and sit down and review them and find the same answers? Sometimes it's easier to see whether you can do that or not, but what you want is a good description. Are all the parts of the recipe for the cake in there, or there's some mysterious hidden secret factors that are actually making the study go that they don't tell you about? That may be a funny way of putting it, but that's kind of the way I like to think about it. So can I sit down and actually make it happen? Would I is a different question, but could I from what they describe? And if they don't give you enough information for that, you need to wonder whether it's because they were trying to get material in limited space And then they might do what this article did, which was have a supplement. They can have a supplementary piece where they put more information afterwards. So this particular article told us what guidelines they used and how they evaluated the papers. And that's really important because there are standards for doing that. So the article itself actually described things really well and used appropriate, accepted tools for doing the work. Another question that I always start to shake and get sweaty about is, are the statistics appropriate? Epidemiology and statistics are the way you judge whether or not something is mathematically appropriate. How many people do you need to treat in order to prove that the treatment works? Or how many people do you need to scan to find one tumor? This is a mathematical, appropriate science, and I'm not very good at it. It's something I don't have any extra knowledge about, but when you're writing science papers, you need to either be able to do that yourself or have advice. So the kinds of statistics have to be appropriate to the question being asked. And in this article, I will show a picture in a minute of some of the types of plots. So they take the information and they sort it out in a way that's appropriate to the kind of material they're talking about. Back in a way at both the methods and the kind of statistics, the information they're presenting to you, is there repeating or overlapping data? That's one of the questions of all those papers they pulled. Is the same person in 6 of those papers? Which means you can't count them 6 times. Could you take it apart and say there were 100 independent people, or there were 5 people counted 20 times each that gave you 100? Because that'll give you a really different validity and dependability. And
Dr. Payton, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to give you a heads up. I'd love to save some time for questions and discussion. If maybe a couple more minutes would be enough.
Yep. So the last part is, what are the conclusions? Are they appropriate to the question? Like, it's what you would teach your kid about how to write a story. Does the ending link back to the beginning? Is the data appropriate? Did they discuss what the limits of the study is? So this was the kind of plot showing intervals that this group used to say what happened in between times, and these kind of stepladder plots are the appropriate statistics for this kind of work. And then the magic factor, in a way, you will see that I've called something the smell test. I like to know, sometimes after I've read the article, who are the authors? Are they experts? Do they have a good track record in that area? Where's their funding from? Have they got conflicts of interest? Is it a group of people or a single person? And sometimes things where 2 or 3 or 5 groups are collaborating, you know that there's more input. They've had to work hard to work together, and they may get a better outcome because of that. What journal did it end up in? We talked about that a little bit before, but has the journal been reviewed, peer reviewed, where the article goes out to people to pre-read and make comments before it gets accepted, as opposed to some of the open journals where everything gets accepted? The smell test is, do I actually trust the answer? It's sort of like doing the calculation on the back of an envelope. If it sounds weird, it might be, and why is that? Sometimes you learn something that's way outlandish, but if I'm reading an article, I want to know, did I actually learn something new, or did I confirm something I already know? And will it change what I do? And that was one of the questions, I think, for this article. Is it going to change how we scan? Is it going to decrease the number of scans or implement? I think they came up with a not quite enough information type of response out of that. So really what I talked about was the anatomy of the article, which gives it its shape. The stuff at the beginning where they should be able to put it in a précis form, the conclusions, and in this case a supplement, the references where you can go and look at all the other people's work that they've presented, And then footnotes and disclosures, as well as in this case, they've talked about human subjects and abbreviations. So does the study that you're reading actually look like a study should? Welcome to my tea room. Nice to be with you.
Thank you so much. That was actually very informative, and I learned quite a bit about research articles that I would like to have some more information, and I would love to have those slides from you actually. So when I'm reading articles, I can reference to them. So I'm going to share back my screen. In the meantime, if anyone has any questions for Barbara or Catherine, we have just a little bit of time left. You can use the raise hand function. And I will pick. If I miss anyone, please let me know. I'm just trying to scroll through everyone's names, but. So I'll start off first, and I have a question for Barbara. After reading the article, you mentioned there was some of your questions were answered, but after reading it, did you have new questions now that you're looking for maybe the next article and then the next update that you would like to learn more about?
So I think that the most striking thing about the article for me that's unanswered still is that there is a lack of research on this particular type of cancer, because it is so rare even among retinoblastoma patients. And so that as Dr. Payne was explaining, without significant numbers to study, it's really hard to draw conclusions that are significant. So I would say that's my big question is, how do we get more information about this particular disease so that we can better discover how to screen for it, and hopefully treat it early and maybe one day cure it. So that would be my main question, is that it's a meta-analysis, and it revealed that there's not a lot of research to put together. I think you said something like 17 articles in the end, over a 20-year span or more. So that was my biggest question coming out of it. And there were reassurances for me, like there was a piece around whether or not the early treatment of the cancer was connected to whether or not someone developed trilateral retinoblastoma. And that was one of my questions. And this meta-analysis seemed to indicate in a broad way, not in a definitive way, but in a broad way, that no, there's no real connection there. And so that was a comfort to me, because you second guess yourself about the treatment decisions you made before and whether or not that you've caused a problem later on, right, as a parent. And so that was reassuring to me from the article.
Thank you. And Genevieve, I see you have your hand up. You can go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. I really, really appreciate the insight and information from tonight's session. I had a question that could be have already been answered, or might be out of the blue, but I know a lot of our discussions around the genetics. Is there something that when we do have the genetic testing presents a predisposition to the trilateral that would give us a sign that that may be in this individual's future?
Yeah, I don't know the answer.
Researchers?
I can't see how to raise my hand. Could I just speak?
Oh,
It's
Don't have to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Somehow I've lost the raise the hand capability. So I think that there is the answer to that, and Hillary's on too. She could correct me, and many others, and Helen could correct me if I'm wrong here. I think there's nothing about the RB1 mutation that is clearly linked to pinealoblastoma. So it's completely random chance as far as we know at the moment. However, I'd like to suggest that maybe at the next cup of tea, could we follow on this theme and take the leadership of CRAB further and present, several of us who are on the call, present not a paper, because this this paper and the subsequent one coming out that follows it is, it really says there's very little known about how to find pinealoblastoma earlier. There's no proper screening. There's no way to solve the problems that Barbara wishes she knew. And yet we have some way out research ideas on how to move forward on that we're beginning in the very earliest phase of thinking, how would we put that together into a research project? Would that be interesting for the next cup of tea?
Ideally, I think it would have been great if we could have continued this discussion here, and then we take the topic of the article and have that kind of discussion of, if this article didn't answer it, what are ways that we can answer the question, and what is being done outside this article that, you know, we could talk about. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so there's not the time to have that kind of discussion, but I've learned from this, and for our next cup of tea, our next presenters will pick their article, and I will ask for a shorter presentation time and make sure we have a longer discussion time. Would that be, I think that would maybe solve that, so we'll have more time to really discuss the topic.
Good.
So I'm really thankful everybody participated today. There's another meeting after this, so I have to stop it here, and we will continue, have our next cup of tea in June. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys again. Stay tuned for any updates on our social media. If you are a survivor or a family member and you're interested in doing a plain language summary, you can email me, ivana.ristevsky@sickkids.ca, and you could follow us on our social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, maybe one day on TikTok as well, but we're out there. And our website, you can find our article. We're slowly building this library of plain language summaries, so you can visit us at www.rbcanadaresearch.com. So if you had any other questions, maybe we could continue the conversation at our regional working group meeting, and you could join us then. But thank you guys so much.